Okay, approaching the next trail division, only 0.1 miles beyond the last. And here you can see Schaefer Springs Loop splits off to the right. And Lovell Canyon Trail trailhead and the loop, Lovell Canyon Loop, continues to the left. So let's go ahead and take the Schaefer Springs Loop. I think this Schaefer Springs Loop may become a bit faint. The trail may become a bit faint, and that's why you're seeing an abundance of cairns on the loop. More cairns on this Schaefer Springs Loop to get you across this wash, and I imagine that during wetter times the grasses and other brush grow to an extent that they may totally clog out this trail and make it invisible. So yeah, in the case that happens, just head for the cairn on the other side of the wash. Here's a unique perspective on the Schaefer Springs Loop. We look over in this direction and you can see a high point. Let's see. I believe it's right up here. If you're on the Griffith Shadow Loop, this is a high point that you're going to eventually skirt at the near base of that high point. And then we continue looking in this direction. Here's where Sexton Ridge begins. And you can see Sexton Ridge continuing on up. Some high points there in the distance. And it continues all the way up to Griffith Peak. We'll get a better view when we ascend a little further. I'm just not sure this trail is going to give a better view, so that's why I'm showing this view here. So there you can see Sexton Ridge all the way from Griffith Peak and down to its starting point. And then you can see where the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail on the western side is going to ascend and be up in those hills that are just in the foreground of the Sexton Ridge. Okay, let's continue, see if we can get some better views. Then I believe we're looking down below us into the Schaefer Spring area. Not sure. We'll see as we continue to ascend the Schaefer Springs Loop. And there's a shot of Handy Peak from this perspective. And by the way, notice that the Handy Peak ridgeline heads down to the left toward the base of Lovell Canyon. And where that ridgeline meets Lovell Canyon is where we saw those rocky bluffs that are reference points, and also where we saw the trailheads for the Lovell Canyon Trail and the Schaefer Springs Trail. or at least where those trails meet the base of Lovell Canyon. Here's a sweeping view of Lovell Canyon from this perspective. You can see the upper end where there is Harris Mountain on the right, Griffith Peak on the left, and the saddle between. A little better view. And looking down into the canyon and along the Wilson Ridge on the far side. They're down beautiful Lovell Canyon, then up that ridge line to Handy Peak. The ridge in the foreground. And then what I said about walls of impenetrable brush from the manzanita, pointed leaf manzanita, and the ashy silk tassel. There you have one example of that wall of brush. And you may encounter some of these on those upper ridge lines, or at least the approach to those ridge lines. Then pointing out some landmarks on the Wilson Ridge over here. There's Harris Mountain at the summit, 10,014 feet. And that line is now the Griffith Peak Backcountry Trail. Very beautiful. It actually is a continuation of Harris Mountain Road, but not a road anymore. The road actually was built during the Depression era, and it stopped somewhere right around this point. You see it disappearing because the chief engineer could not tell President Roosevelt where the road was headed. Maybe he was just a little nervous. Who knows? But there's that road. Makes a great trail, and it'll take you all the way up to the summit of Griffith Peak, and you can split off and hit the summit of Harris Mountain. If you're going from Lovell Canyon to Harris Mountain Summit, a good approach ridge is this ridge that leads up to this high point. I'll trace it down. There you can see it going down to the canyon. So you go up the Lovell Canyon wash, take this ridge to the high point, and believe it or not, when you turn left toward Harris Mountain, you'll see a trail. And that trail will take you all the way to the intersection of Harris Mountain Road and the Wilson Ridge, right in this area. There's a trailhead with trailhead signs for the Griffith Peak Backcountry Trail, and you can then continue on. I've got adventures on Las Vegas area trails showing those adventures from the base of Lovell Canyon. And then heading down in this direction, there's a southern high point right up here. Wait, nope, there it is. And I ascended from the Torino Ranch to the southern high point, and then continued on the Wilson Ridge, and then descended at this point down this ridge line, and I call that the Lovell Canyon Loop Trail, and then took the wash down to the trailhead for the Lovell Canyon Trail system down in the canyon here. And then further on, past the high point, there's the southern high point again. I have another adventure that takes a loop in the other direction, in the south direction, and goes about to this high point and then descends and reconnects with the upper end of Lovell Canyon Road where we parked today. And then there's the twin pinnacles, call them the Midi Matterhorn pinnacles. And beyond that, there's Red Rock Summit. And then at the base of the summit is Rocky Gap Road. And what you see south of that summit area and Rocky Gap Road is the Wilson Ridge continuing south. I've got some adventures in that direction, but definitely have more gaps to fill in on that beautiful isolated Wilson Ridge line. Here's another example of that impenetrable brush and also the burn area. Here you've got some mountain mahogany, pointed leaf manzanita, and ashy silk tassel. All joining together to make progress up this ridge very, very challenging without plowing through anything. And I don't like to plow through any brush. Instead of bushwhacking, I call it bush weaving. And then you can also see the evidence of that carpenter fire burn 2013. Must have just roared up this canyon from the base to the summit. Yeah, there's Griffith Peak. You can see the burn area in the foreground. And then up at the summit of Griffith Peak, yes, burn area. The whole Griffith Peak was burned, at least on this side. A little more green on the northern side. And those trees that were burned were ancient bristlecone pines. You see the remains, majestic pines that, and ponderosa pines that were burned up on Griffith Peak and Upper Sexton Ridge. Take thousands of years to replace them. Okay, here's where the Schaefer Springs Loop is going to descend down into the canyon. I believe there's a crossing down there. We'll have to look carefully, but in our favor, I see what I believe is the continuation of the trail. So let's see if we can get there and where that's going to take us. And continuing the 360-degree view, looking up Lovell Canyon, Griffith Peak on the left, Harris Mountain on the right. There's the Schaefer Springs Loop Trail. And here's where we're descending into a canyon wash. And by the way, I recognize this. This is an important split in the Lovell Canyon base wash. And you can see right at this point, there's a wash that descends from both directions from above. And so, yeah, there are a couple important branches in the Lovell Canyon wash. And here we're taking the western branch. Okay, here we are, descended into the wash. And you see how brushy it gets down here. So let's just hope that our cairn builder, who guides us across washes, built a few cairns here. We shall find out. So here we go. I do see a cairn ahead. Hopefully that's one of many. Okay, will this lead us across the wash? It looks like there's a trail through the rocks, as well defined as it can be. Slick rocks. Another cairn ahead, so we are getting some help. Yeah, there's a lot of various rabbit trails splitting off in a lot of directions, so when you're in this wash, to stay on the trail that you intend, you really need to be watching for the cairns. Well, kudos to whoever created these cairns and did a massive project to scoop out this rock channel in the midst of the wash. Let's look up the channel. That is a lot of work. And by the way, this is where I connected back on the Griffith Shadow Loop. After having given up the east side very brush choked area, and then it was a good trail from this point onward. But let's just see where this is going to take us. Wow, one could get off course pretty easily here. Here we are descending. Here's another cairn, and I see cairns across. So we'll just keep following these cairns, and I see a trail over here, and that's the point where I reconnected with the Griffith Shadow Loop after having descended the wash. So just give you an idea of the terrain here. Yeah, you could really get lost in this area. But so far, there's been some good guidance along this trail. So let's continue and see if we can stick to the route. Haven't been here before. Okay, continuing, here's Cairn. I think it's telling me to ascend here. We don't know. Let's figure it out together. Yeah. There's a cairn up in the distance. But boy, this is where trails begin to disappear and you end up wondering where to continue on the loop. So yeah, here we are. Here's some of that thick brush. Nothing that looks like a trail below at my feet. As you can see, yeah, was that the trail? Who could tell? But thanks for this cairn. So let's take this cairn up. Now I feel like I'm on the lower Griffith Shadow Loop. I did see some other cairns leading across the wash to that point above where I saw what looked like a trail. So who knows? But let's continue along here and see where we might find a trail. And then if it's the trail that we need. So here we go. Definitely a little trail, but I've used this before. I've seen where it leads down Lovell Canyon, but I haven't seen where it continues up. This should be interesting. Worst comes to worst, we'll head back to where we first crossed the canyon and I saw those cairns. Here we are now on the more brush clogged east side of Lovell Canyon. Will we be able to stick to a trail? If so, this could potentially give us a clue as to that 1 mile of the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail that we lost earlier and had to head down the wash. So yeah, okay, I was on this during the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail, and it looks like this is heading down the canyon, and we are not on the Schaefer Springs Loop Trail anymore. Okay, yeah. Maybe this is the Schaefer Spring Loop, continuing around, looping back to where we met the loop, the other side of the loop at the base of Lovell Canyon. I would say that is perhaps the most likely scenario. And so yeah, I don't see any other ways to go. So what this is going to do is it's going to lead us back down to that rocky outcrop where we originally descended into Lovell Canyon. And then I'll poke around some trails above that point to see if we can locate the Schaefer Spring Loop for certain. We may be on it right now, actually, but I want to see if there's another direction for the loop. Yeah, this is the clearest trail, so I'm thinking that last time when I was on the Griffith Shadow Loop and I hit this trail lower in Lovell Canyon and took this to the trail connector area, that I was actually on the Schaefer Spring Loop. So we're going to assume this is the Schaefer Spring Loop that we've been on all along. I did not head back up Lovell Canyon to where I saw some large cairns right at that crossing that we made when we crossed the wash. But they were just buried in the bush, in the brush. They were probably 3 feet high, and there were a couple of them, but they were so buried and there was no trail there. That could have been where the Griffith Shadow Loop continues upward on the east side of Lovell Canyon. But this is where the Schaefer Springs Loop continues to loop around and head down Lovell Canyon. I hope that makes sense. We actually made a big circuit of this area across the canyon, descended into the canyon, and then caught this continuation of the trail and headed down in this direction. And I would almost bet that this is the actual Schaefer Spring Loop that we have been on all along. We did not divert from it. Here we are descending toward, there's that rocky ridge line that descends from Handy Peak on the other side of the canyon on the west side. So we're going to cross there and find the trail connections and then see if there is indeed another part of the Schaefer Springs Loop, or if we have actually been on and completed the Schaefer Springs Loop. And if you want a great view of Sexton Ridge from this perspective and see the entire ridge line descending from Griffith Peak, here you have it right in the center of the screen. Let's get a little closer and let's descend from Griffith Peak. So there we are at Griffith Peak and descending. You can see that upper ridge line. And here's where it begins. Okay, let's continue down. This is going to cross Lovell Canyon and end up at those trail signs that we saw on the other side when we first descended into the canyon. Okay, here we are heading to a crossover point in the canyon that we were at when we were on the Griffith Shadow Loop. Where the loop begins way up on the eastern side of the canyon in that missing mile, we do not know. But you can see the cairns are still guiding us, so I think the chances are that this is the Schaefer Springs Loop, and we have just completed that full loop, the extension from the Lovell Canyon Loop. But we'll poke around up there and find out if there's another way. But as long as we're down here in the base of Lovell Canyon, look how beautiful this canyon is. This is looking down the canyon. See, so many of the canyons in the Southwest are just barren. But here you have a canyon that is full of life. Okay, let's continue across. Thick grass in the spring. This trail is totally missing. Thus, this hidden cairn. That may be all you have in the spring. And believe me, heading down the wash in Lovell Canyon can be pretty brutal because you're going through all of this. You can't see where you're standing and you don't know when you're going to slip on something. And of course, there's always the question of snake brush. And if there are snakes in there, boy, if I were a snake, I'd love living in there. Then here's a little sign midway through the canyon. It simply says trail. And here we are emerging to the west side of Lovell Canyon. And I think the thing that threw me off, we've seen this sign a little earlier. And it says Griffith Shadow Loop to the right, which would be across the canyon. But it doesn't say Schaefer Springs Loop is this direction. However, I think we've been on Schaefer Springs Loop and it does continue this way. So I guess they could add another little sign that indicates this is also Schaefer Springs Loop, goes in both directions and loops around to this point. But we don't know. So we're back on the Lovell Canyon Loop Trail, and we're just about at the point where we split off to that Schaefer Springs Loop. And I think we actually took the entire loop, headed up those hills, eventually at a high point, descended, crossed the canyon, and then continued on the far side of the canyon where we eventually took the canyon crossing, and we ended up in this spot where we began the loop. So yeah, I'm going to take a wild guess that we actually took the entire Schaefer Springs Loop. I was expecting it to branch off in another direction, but no, I don't think it does. And here we are again, where the Schaefer Springs Loop branched off and headed to the right. And I do believe we took that entire loop, and the trail that we took is actually the correct trail of Schaefer Spring Loop. So here it is, Schaefer Springs Loop.